The USS Ariskany. Named after the Battle of Ariskany fought during America's War for Independence, the USS Ariskany was initially planned to be a long-hulled Essex-class ship, but her construction was halted in 1946 as the war drew to a close. Essex-class ships were the most common aircraft carriers used by the American military during World War II, and after the defeat of Nazi Germany, the Ariskany became one of the first ships in this class to get an upgraded design. Her schematics were reworked over the next 4 years to facilitate new fighter jets, providing a blueprint for 14 more upgraded Essex-class aircraft carriers later on. Measuring in at a sprawling 888 feet in length and powered by 4 steam turbines, the USS Ariskany was one of the most impressive aircraft carriers of her era. She departed on her maiden voyage on December 6, 1950, traveling from New York to Florida to test out her capabilities. And once she qualified as a viable aircraft carrier, the USS Ariskany became a vital resource for both the Navy and the Air Force for several decades. However, in 1966, the Ariskany was in the Gulf of Tonkin near Vietnam when disaster struck. A seaman inadvertently set off a magnesium parachute flare on her starboard side, leading to a massive explosion that cost the lives of 44 men. The ever-resilient Ariskany underwent extensive repairs and returned to the Pacific, providing extensive support for the military during both the Korean and Vietnam Wars. After earning 12 battle stars for her service, she was eventually decommissioned in 1976. Nearly 3 decades later, in 2004, the retired aircraft carrier was taken to Florida, where she was slowly transformed into an artificial reef. On May 17, 2006, the USS Ariskany was sunk with controlled detonations that sent her drifting to the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Her ghostly wreck has now become a hub for wreck divers who often find themselves in awe of its sheer size. The Endurance. In the early 20th century, Antarctica was completely uncharted territory, and the quest to uncover the secrets of this mysterious land resulted in the British Empire investing in several expeditions to the frigid continent. The Endurance was one of the last ships to set sail in this age of exploration. Built in 1912, the Endurance was carefully designed to withstand sub-zero temperatures with oak walls twice as thick as regular vessels. It's safe to say that she was one of the most durable ships of her time, but she had one fatal flaw: she didn't have a bold bottom. This meant that she'd be unable to resist the inward pressure of ice if she ever got frozen in place. And that's just what happened when Ernst Shackleton took her on her maiden voyage. About a year after departing from Plymouth, England, she became trapped in pack ice near Antarctica and was eventually crushed by the pressure 10 months later. Her wreckage was eventually found in 2022, nearly 10,000 feet below the surface of the Weddell Sea. Despite the damage done to her hull, her deck, helm, and various other parts are still intact, serving as a chilling reminder of just how dangerous Antarctica can be. The Mary Rose. The Mary Rose was one of the fastest and most powerful ships in Henry VIII's Navy, providing significant firepower for 33 years during the war between England and France. With over 80 guns aboard, the Mary Rose was designed specifically for combat, going on to sink countless enemy ships after she was launched in 1511. Most sailing ships built until then were multifunctional vessels, but the Mary Rose was arguably one of the first ever purpose-built warships that used sails instead of oars. Her design included several innovative features, such as the presence of broadside cannons that could deliver a devastating explosive barrage in the blink of an eye. However, even a ship as powerful as the Mary Rose can't last forever. She was sunk during an intense naval battle in 1545, and for over 400 years, she lay at the bottom of the sea somewhere near Portsmouth, England. A team of wreck divers stumbled across her wreck in 1971, sparking a frenzied attempt to raise her out of the water. Over 10 years later, in 1982, the Mary Rose was hauled back onto land, surrounded by a carefully constructed salvage cage in one of the most expensive maritime recovery projects in history. She's now on display at the Mary Rose Museum, which receives millions of visitors every year. The RMS Titanic. The RMS Titanic is arguably the most famous ship in the world. The tale of the Titanic was immortalized by the epic James Cameron film, but amid all the Hollywood blockbuster spectacle, you might forget that she was a real ship with real passengers, thousands of whom died at her unfortunate collision with an iceberg. One of the most shocking scenes in the movie was when the ship split in two. But this little fact was completely unknown until the wreckage was discovered in 1985. This is when Jean-Louis Michel and Robert Ballard finally discovered the Titanic's shattered remains and noticed that it had broken in two halves, which lay a third of a mile apart in the underwater chasm now known as Titanic Canyon. Her final resting place also happened to be 13 miles away from the coordinates given by her radio operators right before she plunged into the depths. What's interesting is that the rear section of the ship was more or less intact, even though the front section was destroyed beyond recognition. That might be due to the force of the iceberg, which crumbled the bow but didn't have much of an impact on the stern. Ever since the Titanic's wreck was discovered, she's attracted scientists, treasure hunters, and tourists from all around the world. However, her iron and steel hull is rapidly deteriorating in the salty water, and it might not be long before she disappears forever. Would you ever visit the surreal wreck of the Titanic? Let us know in the comments below, and subscribe while you're at it. SM-UB-85. The SM-UB-85 German submarine saw action in World War I, but she didn't last very long. She met a disastrous end at the hands of a mysterious creature. She carried more than her fair share of weaponry, including 10 torpedoes and a 3.5-inch deck gun. A crew of nearly 36 men operating her at any given time, but that wasn't enough to save the submarine in the end. On April 30th, 1918, just 5 months after she was commissioned, SM-UB-85 was found by a British coastal patrol ship near Belfast. And oddly enough, her hatch was partially open and water had flooded through. The British ship began firing, forcing the crew to abandon the submarine and surrender to the enemy, after which the submarine was sunk. However, when the captain was interrogated, he told a bizarrely terrifying story about why the submarine was in such a bad way. According to him, SM-UB-85 had surfaced the previous night to recharge when a massive unknown sea creature began to viciously attack her. The size of this creature must have been enormous, since the submarine was over 180 feet long. Other members of the crew reported firing at it with their handguns, and though the creature eventually stopped its attack, the damage was already done. The submarine wasn't able to submerge anymore after that, which likely resulted in it being found the very next day. This tale has become a part of naval folklore because in 2016, marine engineers scouting an undersea power cable route discovered her intact remains off the coast of Scotland. The submarine looked to be in near-perfect condition, which might cast some doubts on the sea monster story. Whatever the case may be, this eerie submarine wreck is a well-preserved relic of the past, one that could provide some answers about what truly happened the day she fell into the depths forever. Queen Anne's Revenge. The notorious pirate Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, sailed on board a stolen French frigate that was initially called La Concorde, but which he renamed Queen Anne's Revenge. This was first mentioned in the written record around 1710, and most experts believe that this was when she was built. After spending some years as a slave ship, she was captured by Blackbeard in 1717, who added more heavy artillery to her arsenal and made her the flagship of his fleet. With this powerful vessel under his command, Blackbeard traveled from the West African coast to the Caribbean, plundering numerous British, Dutch, and French vessels in the process. In June of 1718, Blackbeard was trying to escape into North Carolina when his ship ran aground, forcing him to leave her behind. He surrendered not long after that and accepted a pardon from the governor, and while he did return to piracy and eventually lost his life in combat, his former ship was nowhere to be seen. The location of Queen Anne's Revenge was shrouded in mystery for centuries, until a private firm called Interstal Inc. found her wreckage in Beaufort Inlet near North Carolina in 1966. Over the years, archaeologists have uncovered numerous historical finds from the sunken wreck, including 31 cannons, which is far more than a ship her size usually has. What's more, the ship contained advanced medical equipment for that age, which indicates that Blackbeard used cutting-edge medical science to take care of his crew. The Vasa. When King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden wanted to expand his territory into Poland in the 17th century, he commissioned a ship with the sole intent to dominate the seas. This led to the creation of Vasa, a juggernaut of a ship that took 2 years to build. But ironically enough, she barely traveled 400 feet from Stockholm before a sudden gust of wind made her take on water and ultimately caused her to sink. This was an extremely embarrassing moment for the king, since the sinking was witnessed not just by thousands of ordinary Swedes, but also foreign dignitaries and diplomats. No one knows why the pride of the Swedish Navy couldn't last 20 minutes on the open water, and after her precious bronze cannons were recovered 30 years later, she fell into obscurity. She spent the next 333 years decomposing just over 100 feet beneath the sea. But in 1956, the Swedish archaeologist Anders Franzen found her once again after an exhaustive search. Much like the Mary Rose, Vasa had to be brought back up with extreme caution to avoid damaging her. She turned out to be exceptionally well preserved down to the ornate carvings on her hull, since up to the 20th century, the waters near Stockholm were too toxic for microorganisms that would have broken down the wood. The SS Thistlegorm. The SS Thistlegorm was launched in 1940, but she embarked on what would be her final voyage just a year after she took to the sea. A British steamship built to aid the war effort, the Thistlegorm completed 3 trips to America, Argentina, and the West Indies, carrying thousands of tons of cargo along with ammunition to fend off potential air attacks. However, when she departed from Glasgow on her ill-fated journey to Alexandria in 1941, she encountered a foe that continues to haunt ships to this very day, the Suez Canal. A collision forced her captain to drop anchor, but while they waited for help to arrive, German intelligence operatives in the region got word of an incoming Allied vessel and dispatched bombers to take her to a watery grave. Around 1:30 a.m. on October 6, 1941, 5 metric tons of high explosives were dropped on the Thistlegorm from above, causing her to sink along with 9 members of her crew. She crashed to the bottom of the Red Sea, where her wreck was eventually discovered by French naval officer and oceanographer Jacques Cousteau. The enormous collection of relics and artifacts she holds has made her wreck site a popular destination for recreational divers, some of whom have come across entire bomber tailplanes and armored vehicles that she was bringing to Egypt. Fujikawa Maru. The 450-foot-long vessel, Fujikawa Maru, was built by Mitsubishi in 1938. Although she didn't serve in her original capacity as a cargo vessel for long. When the Japanese Empire became a major player in World War II, its navy needed as many ships as it could find, even if those weren't capable of firing at the enemy. As a result, the Fujikawa Maru was requisitioned by the Imperial Navy in 1940, where her ability to transport refrigerated cargo was ignored in favor of how many soldiers she could fit within her hulls. This once humble vessel ended up taking part in the Battle of Midway, one of the most devastating naval conflicts of the entire war, and a consequence of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. She somehow survived this fight, but over the years she experienced continuous bombardment from American forces. After being struck repeatedly by torpedoes in 1943, The Fujikawa Maru's time on the sea finally ended during Operation Hailstone. She sank at around 7:15 a.m. on February 18, 1944, but she wasn't forgotten for long. Scuba divers flocked to the Chuk Lagoon where she now rests, her metallic carcass completely covered in coral and surrounded by vibrant marine life. In a way, she almost looks as though she belongs in the deep, calm blue, seeming more like a natural feature of the lagoon than a man-made object, which might explain why scuba divers can't seem to get enough of her. The MS Mediterranean Sky. Initially called the MS City of York when it was built in 1953, the MS Mediterranean Sky, 540 feet long, was a passenger liner that was purchased in 1971. It was bought by a cruise operator who converted her into a ferry and gave her the name we know her by today. She spent over 25 years traveling from London to Cape Town and everywhere in between, but by 1996, she was ready to retire. Her final voyage began in Italy and ended in Patris, Greece, where she lay decommissioned for years. Eventually, she was taken to shallower waters nearby, where she was turned on her side and partially sank in 2003. She's now one of the most interesting shipwrecks in the world, with her capsized profile cutting a desolate but striking image in the blue waters of Greece. Number 4. The Patris. The Hellenic Steaming Company was founded in 1857 on the Greek island of Syros. They were the first steam and ship company in Greece, and in 1859 they launched the King Othon. It was a luxury paddle-wheel steel vessel that was built in England. It measured 223 feet long. The King Othon was one of 2 ships built under the rule of King Otto. He was not a popular Greek ruler and was exiled during the 1862 coup. The King Othon's name was later changed to Patris. It was February 23, 1868, when the Patris took 500 passengers from the town of Piraeus to Syros. The Patris's voyage was not an easy one thanks to a storm. The ship crashed into a reef after some sort of navigational error was made by either the captain or a member of the crew. Although the situation on board was chaotic, the captain and crew evacuated everyone to safety. But the accident caused the ship to split in two and sink to the bottom of the sea. Divers can still visit the wreckage today. One portion of the Patris is 98 feet underwater, and the other is 164 feet down. The paddle wheel is still visible, and divers have even discovered plates and cups that bear Greece's historic coat of arms. Number 3. The RMS Titanic. The RMS Titanic was a British ship that cost $7.5 million to build. Construction started in 1909 in Ireland. The ship was thought of as unsinkable thanks to its design. It was specifically designed for transatlantic crossings, and business was booming during the early 20th century. The Titanic was 882 feet in length, and about 100,000 people watched its official launching. On April 10, 1912, the ship set sail from Southampton, England for New York City. It was April 14, 1912, when an iceberg was spotted late at night at 11:40 p.m. It was part of a 4-mile-wide ice field. The Titanic was not the only ship in the area at the time. Boats in the vicinity messaged each other about the impending dangers. While the risks were communicated to the Titanic, the ship decided not to slow down. It's believed the ship's crew was under immense pressure to get the Titanic from Southampton to New York City on time for the maiden voyage. When the Titanic spotted the iceberg, it was already on a collision course, traveling at 22 knots or 25 miles an hour. Despite amazing efforts employed to avoid the collision, the Titanic grazed the iceberg. Portions of the ice underwater gashed into the side of the ship and created a 300-foot slash. Water then rushed in, putting the ship in serious trouble. The crew believed they would only be able to survive for an hour to an hour and a half. An evacuation was quickly ordered and the lifeboats were set to be loaded. This was by no means a calm procedure, though. It was remembered as extremely chaotic. And there was a major problem. There wasn't enough lifeboats to accommodate all of the passengers on the Titanic. There were 3,300 people on the ship, and the lifeboats could only hold roughly 1,200. Then, when the lifeboats were filled, they weren't filled to capacity. It took less than 3 hours for the ship to sink into the ocean. In the end, about 1,490 to 1,635 people were killed. Only 750 people survived the harrowing ordeal. After the news was reported, there was talk of searching for the wreckage, but it was not easy to pinpoint the exact location that the ship hit the iceberg since the technology wasn't available at the time. It wasn't until 1985 when Robert Ballard led a group of American and French researchers on a mission to finally find the Titanic. It took them 8 days to spot the Titanic off the coast of Newfoundland. They had technology on their side with a submersible sled and an attached camera that could go to 13,000 feet underwater. This technology was developed by Ballard and is the reason they captured images of the ship. It's important to note that Ballard received funding from the US Navy for his project. Ballard's equipment was also meant to be used to find some US nuclear submarines that sank back in the 1960s. The Navy was concerned about the submarines because nuclear weapons were on board. The Navy told Ballard he could use some time to find the Titanic, and he did just that. Do you have a favorite movie or book about a shipwreck? Let us know in the comments, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Number 2, the Edmund Fitzgerald. One of the most infamous shipwrecks in the Great Lakes history was the Edmund Fitzgerald, which sank on November 10, 1975. 29 men went down with the ship into the unforgiving waters of Lake Superior. The incident happened somewhere northwest of Whitefish Point, Michigan, during a terrible storm. The ship was commissioned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company and was named after Edmund Fitzgerald, Northwestern Mutual Life's president at the time. The boat cost about $8 million to build and was launched in Detroit, Michigan in June of 1958. The Edmund Fitzgerald measured 729 feet and was the largest ship on the Great Lakes for its time. Things sadly didn't go well at launching. The boat rolled around violently when it first got on the water. Spectators were almost hit by a giant wave, and one man even suffered a heart attack and died. The Edmund Fitzgerald was the largest ship on the Great Lakes up until 1971. Its final mission took place on November 9, 1975. When it was scheduled to haul iron ore from Wisconsin to Zug Island near Detroit. While on its journey, weather conditions on Lake Superior deteriorated rapidly. Gale warnings were issued, and it was a scary situation for the crew. Hurricane-force winds up to 90 miles an hour with waves reported to be 35 feet slammed into the mighty Edmund Fitzgerald. Another ship on Lake Superior, the Arthur M. Anderson, kept in touch with the Fitzgerald but lost contact around 7:10 p.m. on November 10th. A search of the lake yielded 2 lifeboats from the Fitzgerald, but nobody inside them. Some debris was also found. Rescuers were left with a mystery. Unfortunately, the Fitzgerald sank 535 feet below the lake's surface. A U.S. Navy vessel was sent to investigate the wreckage in May of 1976. They were able to capture video and images of the sunken ship. It was not the last trip to review the wreckage of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Jean-Michel Cousteau, the son of Jacques Cousteau, did a dive to the ship in 1980. The dive was brief, but it was the first time the wreckage had been reviewed since 1976. A series of dives were later done between 1989 and 1995. The 1995 exploration saw divers remove the ship's bell and replace it with a replica. Today, a license is required to make the trip down to the wreckage or to film it. Number 1. The HMS Erebus and Terror. In May 1845, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror sailed from England on an Arctic mission to navigate the Northwest Passage and study the Earth's magnetic field. This mission required the best officers, crew, and vessels available. After all, successfully navigating the Northwest Passage was no small task, since it had been a dream of many sailors for hundreds of years. The voyage of the Erebus and Terror was led by Sir John Franklin and his 128-man crew. Franklin had an impressive naval resume dating back to 1800, when he was just 14 years old. Franklin had been involved in a few naval battles, including the Battle of Trafalgar. He'd even sailed to the Arctic and Canada. But there was one issue with him leading the mission. He hadn't been on a voyage to the Arctic for nearly 3 decades, but he was still the man selected for the mission. When it was time for Franklin's expedition, both ships had steam-powered engines, and the steam was piped throughout the ship as a heating system. The officers and crew were subject to below-freezing conditions, so they needed not to succumb to hypothermia. For the journey to the Arctic, they had their bows reinforced with extra wood and iron so they could handle sailing through icy waters. The Erebus and Terror had equipment on board to desalinate ocean water for drinking and to power the steam engines. There was also more sophisticated equipment that allowed the crew to study the Earth's magnetic field. The expedition would not be easy. The ships Erebus and Terror were supposed to sail to the most frigid parts of Canada and stay there for the winter because of the extremely cold and icy conditions. They would be able to navigate the waters and travel to the Northwest Passage during the summer when the ice wasn't as big of an issue. The crew needed to set sail during the summer since they only had 3 months to take advantage of the prime conditions. They would need plenty of calories to ensure survival, so they brought about 8,000 cans of food. Most importantly, there was plenty of alcohol to raise morale. There was enough food and drink for the men to last 3 years. 1,000 books were also available to anyone who wanted something to do to pass the time, other than booze, of course. The Erebus and Terror started their journey on May 19, 1845 with 134 officers and crew, and a supply ship, the Barretto Jr., followed them on the first leg. Their initial goal was to make it all the way to Greenland, which they accomplished in July. There, the ships would be supplied and letters home were sent to Britain. Crew members who faced illness or disciplinary issues during the first part of the journey were sent over to the Barretto for the return trip. The total officers and crew numbered 129 upon the second departure. Their next stop was the waters of Canada and then Beechy Island, which is located on Devon Island near Barrow Strait. According to records, they arrived here and were scheduled to stay for the winter until the next year. The ships were last spotted by a whaling vessel as they sailed into Baffin Bay in July of 1845. The captain of the whaling ship noted that the crew of the Erebus and Terror seemed to be in high spirits. From this point forward, there was no communication from the Erebus or the Terror. It was 2 years after they'd set sail that the families of the crews started to worry that the ships met a terrible fate. What's known from searches conducted from 1854 to the present is that Franklin and his men set up camp on Beechy Island. Tents were found at the site, and there was evidence that a blacksmith set up a work area as well. But the evidence that stood out the most were the graves. 3 of the men on the mission died and were buried at Beechy Island. Their names were John Hartnell, William Brain, and John Torrington. Back in Britain, Lady Jane Franklin, the wife of Sir John Franklin, was persistent in gathering a search party to find her husband. It was ignored at first, but her tenacity eventually paid off. A reward of £20,000, which in today's market would be over $600,000 was offered for finding Franklin and his crew. This got the attention of a few individuals who decided to find Franklin and claim the reward. The biggest lead came in 1854, when John Ray was on an Arctic expedition of his own. Ray wasn't looking for the Franklin expedition, though. He was exploring the Boothia Peninsula in the Canadian Arctic. The area Ray was exploring was south of Beechy Island, and during his time there, he met some Inuit people who taught him something shocking. With the help of a local Inuit man named Marco, Ray learned that there were stories of white men who died on King William Island. Their deaths were dated back to around 1850. Ray also learned that the Inuit had items belonging to the men. He was able to purchase them with the help of Marco. These items included silverware and a plate. They had identifying information on them that linked the objects to officers with Franklin's expedition. At the time, men who served on ships would bring their own utensils and plates. Ray's discovery was a huge step in solving a major mystery. The Inuit had something else to share as well. They also said that the men who died on King William Island resorted to cannibalism to stay alive. This news was almost too shocking for Ray to fully accept. The Erebus and Terror eluded researchers for years. The Erebus was the first to be located in 2014. Information gathered about the location was used by several research teams. A ship's sonar picked up the wreckage finally in September 2014. Then, a dive team was sent out to explore the wreckage. One of the divers claimed it was their best dive ever. The Erebus was surprisingly intact. They found the ship's anchor and even the ship's bell, which seemed to be in great condition. The Terror was discovered in 2016. A man that had been hunting in the area years before gave a tip to researchers about the location of a ship. He claimed to have seen a large piece of wood sticking out of the water. They went to the area he mentioned, and their sonar picked up something, and it was a ship. A dive team was sent down, and it was confirmed to be the Terror. Like the Erebus, the ship was surprisingly intact. The Nagato-class battleships. The Nagato-class battleships, comprising the Nagato and its sister ship Mutsu, stand as significant examples of naval engineering and military might in the early 20th century. Designed for the Imperial Japanese Navy towards the end of World War I, these super dreadnought battleships were the last of Japan's pre-treaty capital ships. They were also the first to be equipped with 41-centimeter guns, surpassing the then standard 15 inches. This remarkable feat positioned the Nagato class at the forefront of naval firepower during their time. The lead ship, Nagato, often served as a flagship and was involved in various humanitarian and military missions. In the aftermath of the devastating Great Kanto earthquake in 1923, both Nagato and Mutsu played crucial roles in delivering supplies to the survivors, showcasing their utility beyond warfare. The interwar period saw significant modernizations for these battleships between 1933 and 1936. Improvements were made to their armor and machinery, and their superstructures were rebuilt in the distinctive pagoda mast style. These changes not only enhanced their combat capabilities, but also reflected the evolving naval warfare strategies and technological advancements of the time. Their role in World War II was marked by pivotal moments. Nagato notably served as the flagship of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto during the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor, which took place on December 7, 1941. And of course, this event marked the commencement of the Pacific War. Both ships participated in the Battle of Midway in June of 1942, however, they didn't engage in combat. Mutsu's fate was more turbulent compared to her sister ship. She participated actively in various conflicts, including the Battle of the Eastern Solomons in August of 1942, before returning to Japan in early 1943. However, tragedy struck in June of that year when one of the Mutsu's aft magazines exploded, resulting in the loss of 1,121 visitors and crew, ultimately destroying the ship. The Imperial Japanese Navy investigated this incident and controversially concluded that it was the work of a disgruntled crew member, a decision that's been debated by historians, so the exact cause is unknown to this day. Nagato, meanwhile, spent the initial years of the war mostly in training within Japanese waters, but in mid-1943 she was transferred to Truk and finally saw combat during the Battle of the Philippine Sea the following year. She was primarily attacked by American aircraft, though. Her first and only use of main armament against enemy vessels occurred during the Battle of Lake Gulf in October of 1944, after which she sustained minor damage. As the war progressed and resources became scarce, particularly fuel, the IJN decided against fully repairing Nagato. So she was converted into a floating anti-aircraft platform and assigned to coastal defense duties. Post-war, Nagato had a unique fate. She was used as a target for U.S. nuclear weapons tests during the Operation Crossroads in mid-1946. Surviving the first test with minimal damage, she eventually succumbed to the second test and sank, marking the end of an era for one of Japan's most formidable battleships. The story of the Nagato-class battleships is a reflection of the broader narrative of naval warfare in the first half of the 20th century. These ships witnessed the transition from traditional battleship engagements to the dominance of aircraft carriers and air power, which reshaped naval strategies and combat in World War II. Their design, service, and ultimate fates provide invaluable insights into the military history and technological advancements of the era. Next up, we take a closer look at the largest battleship ever built by the Royal Navy. But before we continue, if you're joining us for the first time, make sure you hit that subscribe button to unlock a treasure trove of incredible videos. And don't keep your thoughts to yourself. Drop a comment below and tell us what content you'd like to see next. The HMS Vanguard. HMS Vanguard, bearing the pennant number 23, was the epitome of British naval engineering and the final chapter in the long history of battleships in the Royal Navy. Commissioned after World War II, she was the only ship of her class, preceded by the Lion class and the King George V class. Built by John Brown and Company in Clydebank, Scotland between 1941 and 1946, Vanguard was the largest and fastest battleship in the Royal Navy, but she was also the last battleship to be built. The inception of Vanguard was a response to the growing threat posed by the combined fleets of Germany and Japan. The Royal Navy, anticipating being outnumbered, initiated the construction of the Lion-class battleships. However, the complexity and time required to manufacture the triple 16-inch turrets for the Lion class would delay her completion. So Vanguard was conceived as a modified Lion-class design, utilizing 4 twin 15-inch turrets available from previous ships, allowing for a quicker completion. Vanguard's construction journey was marked by several starts and stops, influenced by the changing tides of war and shifting priorities. Her design underwent multiple revisions to incorporate lessons learned from wartime experiences, such as improved underwater protection and enhanced fuel capacity. Despite these efforts, Vanguard wasn't completed until after the war, missing the chance to participate in the conflict. Her post-war service began with a significant task. In early 1947, Vanguard was chosen to transport King George VI and his family on the first royal tour of South Africa by a reigning monarch. This role highlighted her status not just as a warship, but as a symbol of national pride and royal prestige. Although initially slated for another royal tour of Australia and New Zealand in 1948, it was cancelled due to the King's declining health. Vanguard briefly served as the flagship of the Mediterranean Fleet in 1949, before returning to become the flagship of the Home Fleet Training Squadron. Throughout her career, she usually served as the flagship of her assigned unit, showcasing her significance within the Royal Navy. In the early 1950s, she participated in numerous training exercises with NATO forces, demonstrating her capabilities in a post-war military landscape. She even participated in the Coronation Review of 1953, marking Queen Elizabeth II's ascension to the throne. However, by 1955, the Admiralty announced that Vanguard would be put into reserve upon the completion of her refitting work, signaling the end of her active service. Vanguard's design was a testament to the culmination of British battleship evolution. She had a displacement over 51,000 long tons at full load and was capable of speeds of up to 30 knots thanks to her 4 steam turbine sets. Her armament was formidable, featuring 8 15-inch guns, 16 5¼ dual-purpose guns, and a host of Bofors 40mm anti-aircraft guns. Her armor was extensive, with a main belt thickness of up to 14 inches and a deck armor of up to 6 inches, providing robust protection against enemy fire. Despite her impressive capabilities, the advent of air power and missile technology during and after World War II rendered battleships like the Vanguard obsolete. The strategic importance of battleships had diminished, with aircraft carriers and submarines taking precedence in naval strategy. Vanguard was decommissioned on June 7, 1960. She was then sold for scrap, marking the end of an era for battleships in the Royal Navy. The Bismarck-class battleships, the Bismarck and the Tirpitz. The Bismarck-class battleships, including the Bismarck and its sister ship Tirpitz, were the epitome of Nazi Germany's Kriegsmarine naval prowess in the lead-up to and during the early years of World War II. As the largest and most powerful battleships commissioned by the Kriegsmarine, these fast battleships were a formidable presence, displacing over 41,000 metric tons and armed with an array of 8 15-inch guns. Capable of reaching speeds of up to 30 knots, they were a significant threat to Allied naval and merchant shipping. The genesis of the Bismarck class lay in the competitive naval expansion of the 1930s, spurred by the French Richelieu-class battleships. Designed with a traditional role in mind, that of engaging enemy battleships in home waters, the German Naval Command also saw potential in using these ships as long-range commerce raiders against British shipping in the Atlantic. This duality in strategic purpose mirrored the broader confusion and competing priorities within German naval construction during the decade. Bismarck was laid down in June 1936, and she was completed in September of 1940. Tirpitz followed closely behind her sister ship, with her keel laid in October of 1936 and completion in February 1941. Both ships were built in response to the emerging naval threats and as part of Hitler's ambitious plan to challenge naval powers with formidable surface vessels. Bismarck's operational career was brief yet impactful. In her only operation, Rheinuberg, she ventured into the North Atlantic, aiming to disrupt the crucial supply lines from North America to Britain. In the infamous Battle of the Denmark Strait, Bismarck achieved a tragic victory by sinking the HMS Hood, a pride of the British Royal Navy, and damaging the new battleship Prince of Wales. However, this success was short-lived. Bismarck was subsequently hunted by a relentless pursuit of British naval forces, culminating in a final engagement that saw her defeated and sunk. The debate over the exact cause of her sinking continues, with evidence suggesting a combination of battle damage, scuttling by her crew, and fatal damage inflicted by the Royal Navy's battleship Rodney and King George V. Tirpitz's career, on the other hand, was less marked by direct engagements and more by her strategic significance. Stationed in Norwegian waters, she acted as an intimidating fleet in being, deterring Allied naval operations and threatening the Arctic convoy routes to the Soviet Union. Despite being less active than her sister ship, Tirpitz faced numerous attempts by the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force to neutralize her threat, enduring repeated bombings. Her end finally came in 1944, though not through surface combat, but under the onslaught of Lancaster bombers equipped with tall boy bombs, leading to her capsizing. The design of the Bismarck class reflected the strategic and tactical dilemmas of the time. Initially conceived with a battery of 8 13-inch guns and a top speed of 30 knots, the design evolved in response to international naval developments, particularly the French and Italian naval programs. The final design boasted 15-inch guns, thick armor plating, and a sophisticated propulsion system, albeit with a displacement that strained the limits of existing German naval infrastructure and treaty constraints. Despite their imposing design and the apprehension they evoked among Allied sailors, the service history of the Bismarck-class battleships underscores the constraints faced by battleships during an era where air power and submarines were steadily asserting dominance. Their construction consumed vast resources, and their operational use reflected a strategic misalignment with the realities of naval warfare during World War II. The sinking of Bismarck and the neutralization of Tirpitz revealed the vulnerability of even the most powerful battleships to technologically innovative and determined adversaries. The Bismarck-class battleships and their legacy are a reminder of the fleeting dominance of ships on the high seas and the strategic miscalculations that can arise from overestimating the power of traditional naval assets in the face of changing warfare dynamics. The Yamato-class battleships. The Yamato-class battleships, represented by the iconic Yamato and Musashi, epitomized the pinnacle of Imperial Japanese Navy prowess and ambition in naval engineering leading up to World War II. These colossal vessels, boasting an unparalleled combination of sheer size and formidable armament, held the distinction of being the heaviest and most powerfully armed battleships ever constructed. With a displacement nearing 72,000 long tons at full load, they were equipped with the largest naval artillery ever installed on warships, a battery of 9 460mm or 18-inch guns capable of propelling 3,220-pound shells over a remarkable distance of 26 miles. And adding to this naval powerhouse, a third vessel, initially designated as a battleship, underwent a transformative evolution, being later reconfigured into the aircraft carrier Shinano. Constructed under extreme secrecy to prevent intelligence leaks to adversaries, particularly the United States, the Yamato and Musashi remained veiled in obscurity, with their exact specifications becoming known to the Allies only later in the war. Both battleships were designed to achieve supremacy in the Pacific, embodying Japan's naval strategy and ambitions for regional dominance. The genesis of the Yamato class was rooted in Japan's naval expansionism and the strategic imperative to field a fleet capable of countering the numerically superior U.S. Navy. The design reflected a departure from the treaty limitations and embraced an unparalleled scale and firepower. The battleships were intended as the IJN's trump cards in the decisive battle doctrine, where they'd play a central role in a climatic engagement against enemy fleets. Despite their impressive design, both Yamato and Musashi spent much of their service in naval bases, only deploying occasionally in response to U.S. raids. Their operational use was constrained by the IJN's strategic defensive posture following early losses in the war. The growing threat from submarines and aircraft carriers didn't help either, which relegated these titans to primarily serving as fleet anchors. The fate of all three ships was sealed by U.S. Navy actions. Musashi fell to airstrikes in the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October of 1944, and that same year, Shinano was sunk by the submarine Archerfish shortly after her commissioning in November. Yamato met her end in April of 1945 during Operation 10 Go in a desperate voyage to Okinawa, where she was overwhelmed by air attacks. The design and construction of the Yamato class reflected Japan's industrial might and technical skill in shipbuilding. With a displacement surpassing any other battleship class, an armor scheme designed to withstand intense gunfire, and a propulsion system that granted them a top speed of 27 knots, these ships were marvels of their time. Their main armament of 18.1-inch guns was unprecedented, giving them a reach and a destructive power beyond any contemporary naval artillery. However, the strategic utility of the Yamato-class battleships, like the other battleships we've discussed today, was limited by the changing nature of naval warfare, which increasingly favored air power in submarine warfare over traditional battleship engagements. The Yamato-class battleships hold a significant place in Japanese cultural memory, representing both the peak of Japanese naval ambition and the end of the Imperial Japanese Navy's dominance in the Pacific. Their stories resonate in various forms of media and public memory, serving as enduring symbols of national pride, technological achievement, and the tragic futility of war. What other deadly machines or mighty weapons of war would you like us to make a video about? Let us know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.